Arrogant and full of himself, he thought it would be just another day of total control, until he took his pregnant mistress to visit his terminally ill wife. But what he didn't expect was to collapse on the sidewalk, after hearing a devastating piece of news from his own lawyer. The Seattle skyline stretched like a jagged crown against the fading twilight, each skyscraper a testament to ambition and power. From his corner office on the 42nd floor, Leighton Whitaker watched as his newest building, the Pinnacle, caught the last golden rays of sunlight. A thin smile crossed his angular face as he swirled 18-year-old Macallan in a crystal tumbler. "Another landmark to shape the city," he murmured, satisfaction evident in his deep voice. At 48, Leighton had mastered the art of calculating risk, of knowing exactly when to strike. The silver at his temples complemented his still dark hair, giving him an air of distinguished authority that opened doors and dropped barriers, particularly with women. His intercom buzzed, breaking his reverie. "Mr. Whitaker, your 6:30 is here." Leighton checked his Patek Philippe watch. "Send her in." Vanessa Adler entered with the confident stride that had first caught his attention 18 months ago. At 32, she carried herself with an assurance that belied her age. Today, her tailored black dress highlighted the subtle curve of her 5-month pregnancy, while her raven hair was swept into an elegant chignon. Blue cobalt eyes, sharp and calculating, met his. "The Morgan proposal is ready for your review," she said, placing a leather portfolio on his desk. "I've already spoken with their CFO. They're eager to move forward." Leighton nodded, but his eyes were fixed on her midsection. "How are you feeling?" "Fine." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "The doctor says everything is progressing normally." "Good." He crossed to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "And have you considered my suggestion about taking leave earlier than planned?" A flash of annoyance crossed her face. "I told you, Leighton, I'm perfectly capable of working until my 8th month. The Morgan acquisition is crucial for the 3rd quarter projections." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not just about work. I want to make sure you're comfortable before we what, Leighton?" Her voice held a challenge. "Before you tell Meredith about us, about the baby." Discomfort flickered across his features. "The timing isn't right." Vanessa stepped back, breaking his hold. "The timing is never right." She straightened her spine. "It's been 5 months. I won't keep hiding this pregnancy like it's shameful. I need certainty." Leighton's jaw tightened. "She's dying, Vanessa. The doctors give her 2 months, maybe less. Can't you understand that complicating things now could jeopardize everything I've built, everything we could have?" "What exactly are you afraid of?" Her eyes narrowed. "Your prenuptial agreement protects your personal assets. Unless—" She paused, realization dawning. "Unless there's something about the company. Does Meredith have control of shares you need?" The silence that followed confirmed her suspicion. "She has 30%, he finally admitted. "Critical voting shares that could create complications if they pass to her family after her death. And you need her to sign them over to you." Vanessa gave a humorless laugh. "So that's why we're waiting. Not out of respect for her final days, but because you need her signature." Leighton moved back to the window, his reflection ghostly against the darkening city. "It's business, Vanessa. Something you understand better than most." Her gaze lingered on his back. "Just tell me when this charade will end. I need to know if I'm planning a future for myself, for us, or just myself and my son." "Our son," he corrected sharply. Something indefinable flickered in her eyes. "Of course, our son." Harborview Medical Center stood sentinel over Elliott Bay, its windows reflecting the slate-gray clouds that threatened rain. In room 512, Meredith Whitaker sat propped against pillows, a dog-eared copy of Mary Oliver's poetry in her lap. At 45, illness had hollowed her cheeks and dulled her once lustrous chestnut hair, now hidden beneath an elegant emerald scarf that matched eyes still bright with intelligence. When Leighton entered, those eyes assessed him with quiet perception. "You're late," she observed, her voice stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "Traffic." He placed a bouquet of white lilies on the side table. "How are you feeling today?" Like someone who's been given an expiration date. A faint smile softened her words. "The oncologist was just here. He's adjusting my pain management again." Leighton nodded, uncomfortable with these clinical details of her dying. He moved to the window instead, gazing at the ferry crossing the Sound. "Preston's prepared the documents we discussed. He'll bring them tomorrow." The transfer of my shares. It wasn't a question. It's for the best, Meredith. Your family has never understood the business. They'd sell at the first opportunity, destabilizing everything we've built. Everything you've built, you mean? Her voice held no bitterness, only a calm assessment. I stopped being an active partner years ago, didn't I? Somewhere between your third and fourth affair. Leighton turned, eyes narrowing. We agreed not to revisit that. Did we? She marked her place in the book with a slender finger. I remember agreeing to discretion, not amnesia. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady beep of monitoring equipment. I heard an interesting rumor today, Meredith finally said, about your marketing director. Vanessa, isn't it? Leighton's expression remained carefully neutral. What about her? They say she's pregnant. Meredith watched him closely. Quite far along, apparently. He maintained his composure through practiced discipline. I hadn't noticed. Haven't you? A sad smile touched her lips. You always had a type, Leighton. Ambitious, beautiful. Intelligent enough to be useful, not enough to be threatening. You're not well, Meredith. You shouldn't exhaust yourself with office gossip. On the contrary. She adjusted her position with a wince. Gossip is one of my few remaining pleasures, along with clarity. Terminal illness brings remarkable clarity, you know. He checked his watch pointedly. I should let you rest. I'll come back tomorrow with Preston. Bring her too. What? Vanessa. Meredith's eyes held his, unwavering. Bring her with you tomorrow. If I'm signing over my stake in our company, I'd like to meet the woman who'll be standing beside its future. Leighton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. That's not necessary. It wasn't a request, Leighton. Her voice, though quiet, carried an authority he'd almost forgotten she possessed. I want to meet her. I want to look in her eyes before I sign those papers. He stared at his wife, searching for signs of the manipulation or anger he would understand. Instead, he found only that serene certainty that had drawn him to her 2 decades ago, before ambition had calcified his heart. Fine. He moved toward the door. Tomorrow, then. Leighton. Her voice stopped him. Does she know about the others? His hand tightened on the doorknob. What others? The ones before her. The ones who also thought they were special. Without answering, he left, the door closing softly behind him. Rain tapped against the windshield of Leighton's Audi e-tron GT as he waited outside Vanessa's downtown apartment building. His fingers drummed impatiently on the steering wheel, mind racing through scenarios for tomorrow's meeting. When Vanessa slid into the passenger seat, her perfume, something expensive with notes of jasmine, filled the confined space. She was dressed casually in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that did little to hide her growing belly. This is unexpected, she said, genuine surprise in her voice. Twice in one day. Plans have changed. He pulled smoothly into traffic. Meredith wants to meet you tomorrow. Vanessa went very still. She knows. She suspects. He navigated through the rain-slicked streets with practiced ease. And she's using it as leverage. She wants to meet you before signing over her shares. And you agreed? Disbelief colored her tone. What exactly am I supposed to say to your dying wife, Leighton? Sorry about the cancer, but thanks for the company shares. You'll say whatever needs to be said, he snapped, then softened his tone. It's a formality, an hour of discomfort for our future. Vanessa turned to stare out the window, her profile sharp against the city lights. And after tomorrow? What then? Then everything proceeds as planned. The shares will be transferred. The regional expansion moves forward under your marketing strategy, and He reached for her hand. We stop hiding. She allowed him to take her hand, but didn't return the pressure. And if she refuses to sign, she won't. His confidence was absolute. Meredith has always been practical. She knows her time is limited, and she'd rather leave a legacy than complications. Vanessa studied his profile in the dim light. You speak about her so clinically. Would you prefer sentimentality? A edge crept into his voice. We haven't had that kind of marriage for years. And yet you stayed married. Divorce is messy, expensive. Neither of us wanted the publicity. How convenient. Her tone was unreadable. They drove in silence for several minutes before Leighton spoke again. Have you thought about names? For the baby? The question seemed to surprise her. I have some ideas. I've always liked Thomas, after my grandfather. He built the first Whitaker construction company from nothing. Thomas, she repeated, testing the name. It's distinguished. Leighton nodded, pleased. A strong name for my son, the next generation. Vanessa's phone chimed with a message. She glanced at it, then quickly put it away. Work? He asked. Just the doctor's office confirming my appointment next week. She turned toward him. Will you be there? Of course. He squeezed her hand. I told you, things change after tomorrow. No more secrets. As they pulled up to her building, Vanessa gathered her things but didn't immediately exit. Leighton, what if things don't go as planned tomorrow? What's your contingency? The question caught him off guard. In their 18 months together, Vanessa had never questioned his strategies. There's always a contingency, he answered carefully, but it won't be necessary. Trust me. She studied him for a long moment, then leaned in to kiss his cheek. Always the architect, planning for every possibility. As she stepped out into the rain, Leighton felt an unfamiliar prickle of unease. Something in her tone, in the calculating assessment behind her cobalt eyes, reminded him suddenly of Meredith, the younger Meredith before illness and his betrayals had dimmed her fire. He watched Vanessa enter her building, then checked his rearview mirror before pulling away. His gaze caught on a black sedan parked half a block behind. It looked familiar, though he couldn't place why. His phone rang through the car's speakers. Preston Novak flashed on the dashboard display. Tell me the papers are ready, Leighton answered without preamble. They are. His attorney's voice came through, sounding strained. But there's something else. Something concerning. What is it? Not over the phone. Can you come to my office? Leighton checked the time. Nearly 9 p.m. Now? It's about Vanessa Adler. Preston's voice dropped. And some irregularities I've found in the company finances. The uneasy feeling from moments before crystallized into something sharper. Leighton made an illegal U-turn, heading toward downtown. I'll be there in 15 minutes. As rain pelted harder against the windshield, he glanced again in his rearview mirror. The black sedan had pulled out behind him, keeping pace at a discreet distance. Preston Novak's office occupied the 23rd floor of a building Leighton had developed 7 years earlier. The attorney was waiting at his desk when Leighton arrived, his thin face illuminated by the harsh glow of his computer screen. Rain pounded against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a watery backdrop to their meeting. This better be important, Leighton said, declining to sit. I've got a full day tomorrow. Preston adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. I was reviewing the finalized transfer documents when I received this. He turned his monitor toward Leighton, an email from Howard Sanderson. Sanderson and Pierce. Leighton frowned. The employment law firm. They're representing Vanessa Adler. Preston's voice was clinically precise. She's prepared to file a sexual harassment and hostile work environment claim against you and Whitaker Properties. Leighton let out a bark of laughter. That's absurd. She's carrying my child, which the claim acknowledges as resulting from a relationship allegedly initiated under duress. Preston scrolled through the document. They're claiming you implied her continued employment depended on her receptiveness to your advances. She pursued me. Leighton's voice rose sharply. At the Chicago Development Conference, she came to my hotel room. Preston removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. The complaint references 3 other female employees who've provided statements supporting a pattern of behavior. The room suddenly felt too small. Leighton moved to the window, watching rivulets of rain create chaotic patterns against the glass. Names: Rebecca Winters, Claire Donovan, and Sophia Kim. Leighton's jaw tightened. Each name triggered a flash of memory. Rebecca, his executive assistant before she abruptly resigned 3 years ago. Claire, a talented architect who transferred to their Boston office. Sophia, a financial analyst who left to pursue other opportunities after 6 months of a discreet arrangement. This is a shakedown, he said flatly. She's using the pregnancy as leverage. There's more. Preston hesitated. In preparing our response, I ran a standard background check on Ms. Adler. Her financial records show some inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? Large deposits to an offshore account in the Caymans, 6 transactions over the past 4 months, totaling just over $3 million. Leighton turned from the window. Source? That's the concerning part. The transfers originated from shell companies that, when traced back, appear connected to Whitaker Properties' operational accounts. The implication hung in the air between them. Leighton returned to Preston's desk, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. You're telling me she's embezzling? I'm telling you, money is moving from our accounts to hers through sophisticated channels designed to hide the trail. Preston picked up a file. There's also this. The Westlake project specifications, our bid details, financial projections, environmental survey results were accessed and downloaded by her credentials multiple times, most recently last week. The same week, Archer Development underbid us by exactly 2.8%. Leighton's voice was deadly quiet. Perfect number, just enough to win without raising suspicion. Exactly. Preston leaned back. The sexual harassment claim could be a smokescreen. If we're busy defending that, we might not look too closely at the financial irregularities. Leighton's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Vanessa. Thinking about tomorrow. Should I dress conservatively to meet M? He stared at the message, seeing it now through an entirely different lens. Can you freeze the accounts? Already done for most of them, but approximately 3 million is already gone. And the harassment claim. We can fight it, but it will be public. Messy. The timing with Meredith's condition. Preston trailed off delicately. Would damage the company's reputation and stock price exactly when we're negotiating the West Side Marina development. Leighton completed the thought, the pieces fitting together with terrible clarity. She's boxing me in from multiple angles. Preston nodded soberly. There's a clear pattern here, and the pregnancy adds another dimension of complexity. If it's even mine. The words escaped before Leighton could stop them. Have you considered that possibility? Preston asked carefully. Leighton didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and punched in a number. Who are you calling at this hour? Preston asked. Daniel Mercer, head of security. Leighton switched to speaker as the call connected. Mr. Whitaker? A gruff voice answered. Daniel, that surveillance you were running on Ms. Adler, what's the latest? Preston's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She had dinner with a man at Canlis 3 nights ago, Mercer reported. Tall, dark hair, athletic build. They appeared intimate. Name? Still working on that. But I can tell you he's connected to Archer Development. Arrived in one of their company cars. I need everything you have on him by morning. Leighton ended the call, then turned to Preston. I've been having her followed for the past 2 weeks. May I ask why? A muscle worked in Leighton's jaw. Instinct. Something felt off. She's been asking too many questions about the Mercer Island and Lake Union properties, projects she has no direct involvement with. The company's most valuable land holdings, Preston noted. Exactly, now I know why. Leighton paced the office. Tomorrow's meeting with Meredith. We need to delay. Preston shook his head. The oncologist called today. Her condition is deteriorating faster than expected. If we want those shares transferred cleanly, it needs to happen within days. Leighton stopped pacing. I'll handle Vanessa. You make sure those transfer documents are ironclad. And the harassment claim? Let them file. We'll counter with embezzlement charges. Meanwhile, I want a DNA test arranged. For the baby? Preston looked uncomfortable. That's a delicate matter, especially with her pregnancy this far along. Find a way. Leighton headed for the door. And Preston. Not a word of this to anyone, especially not at the hospital tomorrow. The next morning, Seattle's perpetual gray had given way to rare autumn sunshine. Leighton sat in his parked car outside the hospital, watching patients and visitors stream through the entrance. Beside him, Vanessa checked her appearance in the visor mirror, her expression betraying nothing of the woman Preston's revelations had painted. She wore a modest navy dress that simultaneously acknowledged her pregnancy while downplaying it, the perfect strategic choice for meeting her lover's dying wife. Leighton found himself coldly admiring her calculation, even as rage simmered beneath his composed exterior. Remember, he said, this is about making Meredith comfortable with the transition. Answer her questions honestly, but there's no need to elaborate on our relationship. Vanessa turned to him, eyes searching his face. You seem tense, more than the situation warrants. My wife is dying, and I'm introducing her to my pregnant girlfriend. Tension seems appropriate. That's not it. Her gaze was disconcertingly perceptive. Something's changed since last night. Instead of answering, Leighton checked his watch. Preston's meeting us in the lobby. Let's not keep him waiting. As they walked through the hospital entrance, Leighton maintained a careful distance from Vanessa, hyper-aware of every move she made. Was she really embezzling millions? Selling company secrets? Using her pregnancy as leverage in an elaborate scheme? The questions circled like vultures. Preston was waiting near the information desk, his thin face grave. Leighton, Ms. Adler. His nod to Vanessa was coldly professional. The documents are prepared. Dr. Chambers has cleared Mrs. Whittaker for visitors, but cautioned to keep it brief. The elevator ride to the 5th floor was silent. When they reached room 512, Leighton paused with his hand on the door. "Let me speak with her first," he said to Vanessa. "I'll call you in when she's ready." Inside, Meredith was sitting up in bed, looking surprisingly alert. Someone, a nurse perhaps, had helped her change into a pale blue silk robe. A touch of color had been applied to her lips, and her scarf was arranged elegantly around her shoulders. Despite the ravages of her illness, she projected a quiet dignity that caught Leighton off guard. "You came." Her voice was soft but steady. "And did you bring her?" "She's outside," Leighton confirmed, moving to the bedside. "Meredith, I want you to know that none of this was planned, it just happened." A flicker of something amusement crossed her face. "Things don't just happen with you, Leighton. Everything is calculated, measured for maximum advantage." She adjusted her position slightly. "But that's not why I wanted to see her. I'm not interested in apologies or explanations." "Then why?" "Curiosity." Meredith's green eyes held his. "I want to know if she understands what she's getting into. With you." "With the company." Leighton frowned. "The company will be fine once we complete the transfer." "Will it?" She picked up a glass of water from her bedside table, taking a small sip. "I've been having some interesting conversations lately." "With whom?" "People who care about my legacy. About the truth." She replaced the glass carefully. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice the Mercer Island property being moved into a separate LLC, or the backroom negotiations with foreign investors for the Lake Union development?" Leighton felt his pulse quicken. "Those are complex business matters that don't concern you, don't they? I may have stepped back from day-to-day operations, but 30% ownership still entitles me to information." Her gaze hardened. "Especially when my name is being attached to potentially illegal activities." "There's nothing illegal. Foreign money laundering through real estate isn't exactly legal, Leighton." She spoke the words calmly, as if discussing the weather. "Nor is manipulating environmental impact reports to fast-track approvals." The monitors beside her bed registered a slight increase in her heart rate, the only indication that the conversation was affecting her. "Where are you getting this information?" Leighton demanded. "Does it matter?" "What matters is that I have it." She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Now, are you going to invite her in, or shall I?" Unsettled, Leighton moved to the door and signaled to Vanessa. She entered with Preston following close behind, his expression professionally neutral as he carried his leather portfolio. "Meredith, this is Vanessa Adler, our Director of Marketing." Leighton's introduction was stiff. "Vanessa, my wife Meredith." Vanessa stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mrs. Whittaker, thank you for seeing me." Meredith took her hand, holding it a moment longer than necessary. "Please call me Meredith, and I should be thanking you for coming. This can't be comfortable." "No," Vanessa agreed, withdrawing her hand. "It isn't. Please, sit." Meredith gestured to the chair beside her bed. "You shouldn't be standing in your condition." As Vanessa sat, Meredith's gaze moved deliberately to her midsection. "How far along are you?" 5 months. "A boy, I understand?" Vanessa shot a quick look at Leighton. "Yes. Do you have a name picked out?" "We've been discussing Thomas," Vanessa replied. "After Leighton's grandfather." "Ah," Meredith nodded. "The family patriarch. Appropriate." She turned to Preston. "Mr. Novak, I assume you have documents for me." Preston stepped forward, opening his portfolio. "Yes, Mrs. Whittaker. The transfer agreement for your shares in Whittaker Properties, as discussed." "May I review them first?" "Of course." He placed the documents on the adjustable table in front of her. As Meredith began reading, Leighton studied the interaction between the two women. There was something in Meredith's demeanor, a strange confidence despite her weakened state, that unsettled him. And Vanessa, usually so composed, showed subtle signs of discomfort. A finger tapping against her knee, eyes that didn't quite settle. "This all seems in order," Meredith said after several minutes. "Except for one detail." She looked up at Preston. "The environmental compliance section for the Lake Union project isn't included." Preston glanced at Leighton, clearly caught off guard. "I wasn't aware that was to be part of this transfer." "It's essential," Meredith insisted. "I won't sign without it." "That project has its own separate documentation," Leighton interjected. "It's not relevant to this share transfer." "It is to me." Meredith's voice was quiet, but firm. I need to know my name won't be associated with what's happening there. The room fell silent. Vanessa's eyes darted between Leighton and Meredith, calculation evident in her expression. What exactly are your concerns about Lake Union? She asked Meredith, ignoring Leighton's warning glance. Ask your lover, Meredith replied calmly. Ask him about the adjusted soil samples and the suppressed environmental impact report. Ask him why 3 EPA officials received consulting fees through Cayman accounts last quarter. Vanessa went very still, her hand moving protectively over her belly in what Leighton now recognized might be a calculated gesture rather than a maternal one. I don't know what you're talking about, Leighton said evenly. Preston, perhaps we should continue this another day when Mrs. Whittaker is feeling stronger. I feel strong enough, Meredith countered. Strong enough to make decisions about my legacy. She turned to Vanessa. Did you know that the Lake Union property sits on contaminated soil from an old chemical plant? That developing it without proper remediation could expose thousands to carcinogenic compounds? That report was inconclusive, Leighton cut in sharply, and subsequently revised by qualified experts. Experts on your payroll, Meredith noted. She held Vanessa's gaze. Cancer is a terrible way to die, Ms. Adler. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, especially not young families who might live in those luxury condos you're so effectively marketing. The monitor beside Meredith's bed began beeping more rapidly. A nurse appeared at the door. Everything all right in here? Your heart rate is elevated, Mrs. Whittaker. I'm fine, Meredith assured her. Just a stimulating business discussion. The nurse looked skeptical, but withdrew after adjusting something on Meredith's IV. I think we should conclude for today, Preston suggested diplomatically. Mrs. Whittaker needs her rest. Not until I understand what's happening. Vanessa's voice was tight. She turned to Leighton. Is what she's saying true? About Lake Union? Before Leighton could answer, his phone rang. Daniel Mercer's name flashed on the screen. He stepped away to answer it, keeping his voice low. What do you have? The man she met at Canlis, Mercer reported. His name is James Hargrove. He's Archer Development's chief counsel and her ex-husband. Ex-husband? Leighton's voice rose despite his effort to control it. Divorced 3 years ago, right before she joined Whittaker Properties. But here's the kicker. They've been meeting regularly for months, at least twice a week at her apartment. Leighton ended the call and turned back to the room, finding 3 pairs of eyes fixed on him. Is everything all right? Meredith asked, her voice carrying a note of concern that Leighton now suspected might be feigned. Fine. He moved to Vanessa's side. We should go, the nurse is right. Meredith needs rest. Vanessa didn't move. You didn't answer my question about Lake Union. We'll discuss it later. I think now is appropriate, she insisted, something hard crystallizing in her expression. Especially if there's any truth to these allegations. Allegations from a dying woman on painkillers, Leighton said dismissively. Hardly reliable. The cruelty of his words hung in the air. Even Preston looked shocked. Perhaps, Meredith said after a moment, you should ask your marketing director about her meetings with EPA investigators last week, or her dinner with James Hargrove at Canlis 3 nights ago. Vanessa's face drained of color. Leighton felt a surge of grim satisfaction at this confirmation, followed immediately by dawning horror at the implication. You've been watching me? Vanessa asked him, her voice dangerously low. And I've been watching Leighton, Meredith added calmly, for longer than either of you realize. The monitors began beeping more insistently. This time 2 nurses appeared. I'm sorry, but we need to ask you all to leave, the senior one said firmly. Mrs. Whittaker needs to rest now. As they were ushered out, Leighton caught Meredith's eye. What he saw there wasn't the resentment or bitter resignation he expected, but something far more unsettling. The satisfied look of someone watching their carefully laid plans unfold exactly as designed. In the hallway, Vanessa rounded on him. You had me followed. Her voice vibrated with controlled rage. And you've been meeting your ex-husband behind my back, he countered. Planning what exactly? To sell company secrets? To frame me for environmental violations? To trap me with a pregnancy that might not even be mine? The slap echoed in the hospital corridor. Vanessa's hand left a red mark across his cheek. How dare you, she hissed. You arrogant, controlling bastard. Preston stepped between them. This isn't the place, he warned, glancing at a curious orderly passing by. Vanessa stepped back, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. James and I have been working together on a class action suit representing families affected by your Lake Union development, she said, her voice steady despite her evident anger. Families already showing elevated cancer rates from groundwater contamination you covered up. With information you stole, Leighton shot back, while embezzling millions from company accounts. A cold smile touched Vanessa's lips. Is that what you think? She glanced at her watch. I have a doctor's appointment. When you're ready to have a rational conversation about our child's future, a future that won't include poisoned communities or illegal business practices, you know where to find me. She walked away, her head high, leaving Leighton staring after her with the disturbing realization that he might have gravely underestimated both women in his life, and that somehow, impossibly, they might be working together to destroy everything he had built. Rain returned to Seattle with a vengeance that evening, pelting against the windows of Leighton's penthouse as if demanding entry. He stood in his minimalist living room, tumbler of scotch in hand, watching lightning illuminate the churning waters of Puget Sound far below. 3 unanswered calls to Vanessa burned in his mind like acid. The elevator chimed, the private one that opened directly into his apartment. Only 2 people had access. Leighton didn't turn as the doors whispered open. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. You threatened to freeze my accounts. Vanessa's voice was ice. That got my attention. Now he turned. She stood just beyond the elevator, still in the navy dress from earlier, though she'd added a black trench coat against the rain. Water dripped from her umbrella onto the marble floor. Did you think I wouldn't discover it? He asked. The embezzlement, the corporate espionage, your little scheme with your ex-husband. She set her umbrella in the stand by the door and removed her coat with deliberate calm. Is that what Preston told you? That I'm embezzling? The evidence is clear. $3 million, Vanessa, transferred through shell companies to your Cayman account. A strange smile played at her lips. And you believe I did this? Why, because I'm pregnant and plotting to trap you? Because I'm a greedy, manipulative woman who seduced you for your money? The transfers originated from your credentials. Your access code was used to download confidential documents on projects you had no involvement with. Your phone records show dozens of calls to Archer Development. To James, she corrected. My ex-husband, not to Archer, who happens to be their chief counsel, who happens to be a specialist in environmental law. She moved further into the room, one hand resting on her belly. Did Preston show you the actual transfer records, the routing numbers, the account holder's name, or did he just tell you what you wanted to hear, that your pregnant mistress is betraying you? Something in her tone gave him pause. What are you implying? That perhaps you should verify your information before making accusations? She shook her head. But that's not your style, is it? You don't verify, you eliminate perceived threats, just like you did with Claire Donovan when she rejected your advances, or Sophia Kim when she threatened to talk. Leighton's grip tightened on his glass. They were both compensated generously. For their silence, Vanessa finished. And Rebecca Winters. Was she compensated too, or just frightened into leaving without severance when you spread rumors about her competence? How do you know these details? Because they told me, Leighton. All of them. When I started building the case against you. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He set down his glass to hide the tremor in his hand. So the harassment claim is real. Very. And our relationship? The baby, all part of your trap? Something complicated passed across Vanessa's face. Our relationship was real. Initially, I was attracted to your power, your confidence. I convinced myself you were different with me than you had been with them. A bitter laugh escaped her. Classic mistake. When did it change? 6 months ago, when I found the altered Lake Union environmental reports in your private server. Leighton's mind raced back. 6 months ago, right around when she'd told him she was pregnant. And the baby? Vanessa's hand moved protectively over her belly. The baby is real. Whether he's yours. She left the sentence hanging. Rage surged through him. You let me believe that you were in control? She cut him off. That I was just another conquest. Yes, I did. It seemed only fair, considering. Considering what? Considering that you let me believe you were an honorable man building a legitimate business. Her blue eyes flashed. Instead of someone willing to poison families, children, for profit. Leighton stalked to the bar and poured another drink, buying time as he recalculated. The pregnancy test results, the doctor's appointments I attended. All staged? The pregnancy is real, she repeated. The appointments were real. But there were other appointments you didn't attend, other conversations you weren't part of. With James, she didn't deny it. So your ex-husband might be the father of your child? Leighton gave a harsh laugh. And I'm just the convenient target for a sexual harassment suit and the deep pockets for child support. You misunderstand me, Vanessa said. I'm not after your money for myself. I'm after justice for the families at Lake Union, for the women you've victimized. The harassment suit is just the beginning. Lightning flashed again, throwing her face into sharp relief. In that instant, Leighton saw something in her expression that chilled him more than her words. The same determined conviction he'd seen earlier in Meredith's eyes. You've been working with my wife. The realization came with stunning clarity. Vanessa didn't immediately respond. When she did, her voice was quiet. Meredith reached out to me 3 months ago, after she found my name in your text messages. 3 months earlier, Meredith Whittaker sat in her oncologist's office, the words stage 4 and terminal still echoing in her mind. Through the window, she could see Seattle's skyline, a testament to her husband's ambition and their shared enterprise. Mrs. Whittaker? The doctor's voice was gentle. Do you have any questions? How long? Her own voice sounded distant to her ears. With aggressive treatment, perhaps 8 months, possibly a year. A year. One revolution around the sun. She nodded, already calculating. Not long, but perhaps long enough. And without treatment? The doctor hesitated. 4 to 6 months. But the quality of life would be better, she finished for him. Less time in hospitals, fewer side effects. That's often the case, yes. Meredith gazed out at the city again, her decision crystallizing. I'd like to focus on quality then. As she left the medical building, her phone buzzed with a text from Leighton, the third she'd ignored today. She was about to silence it, when she noticed it wasn't meant for her at all. Tied up in meetings until 8. Meet at the condo instead of dinner. Meredith stared at the message, a cold clarity washing over her. Leighton only used one condo for his affairs, the lakeshore property she'd insisted he keep off the company books. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, instead of replying, she took a screenshot. That evening, while Leighton worked late, Meredith accessed his private server using the emergency credentials he didn't know she'd maintained. Years of marriage to a man with secrets had taught her to keep a few of her own. 3 hours later, she had what she needed. Text exchanges with a woman named Vanessa Adler, financial records showing troubling patterns of movement through offshore accounts, and most damning of all, the original environmental impact report for the Lake Union development, along with the doctored version subsequently submitted to regulators. The next morning, she made 2 calls. The first to Curtis Hammond, a litigation attorney she'd known since college. The second to Preston Novak. Preston, she said when he answered, I need your help with a delicate matter. Of course, Mrs. Whittaker, what can I do for you? I've received some disturbing information about Whittaker Properties, information that suggests potentially illegal activities. A pause. What kind of activities? Financial improprieties, environmental violations, sexual harassment. She kept her voice steady. I need to know if you're Leighton's attorney or the company's. Another, longer pause. Both, technically, but my primary fiduciary duty is to the company. Good, then I need you to meet me today, and Preston, come alone. You turned Preston against me? Leighton's disbelief was palpable. She showed him evidence of what you've been doing, Vanessa explained. The Lake Union cover-up, the bribery of EPA officials, the harassment pattern. Preston had a choice, become complicit or help prevent further damage. And he chose to betray me. Leighton's voice was hollow. After 15 years, he chose to protect the company and himself from potential criminal charges. Vanessa moved to the window, watching the storm. Meredith gave him that chance. So what was the plan? You seduce me, get pregnant, possibly with another man's child, while my dying wife plots with my attorney to take my company. Not take it. Vanessa turned back to him. Transform it. The company has legitimate projects, valuable assets. Meredith wants those preserved, just cleansed of the corruption you've introduced. Leighton sank onto the leather sofa, the magnitude of the betrayal overwhelming him. And where do you fit in this grand scheme? I was already building a case against you when Meredith contacted me. The harassment suit, the evidence of environmental violations. What I didn't have was access to your private financial records, the evidence of money laundering, bribery, tax evasion, which Meredith provided. Vanessa nodded. She had what I needed. I had what she needed, which was evidence that could be used in court. As a shareholder filing internal complaints, Meredith's position was complicated. But as an employee filing a harassment claim with supporting documentation of other illegal activities, you created a legal pathway for her. Leighton finished the thought, reluctant admiration mixing with his anger. And what about the pregnancy? Was that part of Meredith's plan too? A flash of genuine emotion crossed Vanessa's face. The pregnancy was unexpected. It complicated things, because you weren't sure who the father was. She didn't confirm or deny this, which was confirmation enough for Leighton. So what happens now, he asked. You file your suit dragging my name and the company through the mud. Meredith transfers her shares to some environmental trust. And you, what? Ride off into the sunset with your ex-husband and possibly my child? It doesn't have to be that way. Vanessa's voice softened slightly. There's still a chance to mitigate the damage to the company and to yourself. By doing what? Confessing? Surrendering control? By making it right. Starting with Lake Union, full environmental remediation, compensation for affected families, new standards for all future projects, and yes, a change in leadership. Leighton laughed bitterly. You want me to step down? The board will remove you anyway once the evidence comes to light. This way, you control the narrative. And what about the baby? Vanessa hesitated. A paternity test is scheduled for next week. Without my knowledge or consent? His anger flared anew. It's non-invasive. Just a blood draw from me. The results will be conclusive. Leighton stood abruptly and moved to the bar again, his back to her. You've thought of everything, haven't you? You and Meredith. The perfect trap. Not a trap, Leighton. Accountability. He turned, expression suddenly calculating. And if I were to offer you more than Meredith can, say 50 million, a clean break, full custody of the child regardless of paternity. Something like disappointment crossed Vanessa's face. That's your solution? Another bribe? It's a negotiation. Something I'm very good at. There's no negotiating this, Leighton. The evidence has already been secured, multiple copies, multiple locations. She picked up her coat. Whatever you're planning, threats, bribes, destroying evidence, it's too late. Nothing's ever too late. His voice hardened. You should know that about me by now. Vanessa slipped her coat on, her pregnancy more visible as she moved. Meredith warned me you'd react this way, that you'd try to find an angle, a way to regain control. She knows me well. Better than you think. Vanessa moved toward the elevator. She's anticipated your next 3 moves. The funds you think are hidden in the Belize account, frozen, the backup servers in Arizona, accessed, the leverage you had on Commissioner Harkins, neutralized. Each revelation hit Leighton like a physical blow. How? He managed. Because while you were focused on building your empire, Meredith was watching, learning, creating her own network. Vanessa's blue eyes were cold now. Did you really think she spent all those years as just a passive English professor? That she didn't understand what you were doing? The elevator doors opened at her approach. One more thing, she said, stepping inside. The board meeting tomorrow. It's been moved up to 9 a.m. Preston has prepared a complete briefing package for each director. I suggest you prepare a statement. As the doors began to close, Leighton lunged forward, holding them open with one hand. This isn't over. Actually, it is. Vanessa's voice was steady. And Leighton, Meredith asked me to tell you something. What? The video from your Lakeshore condo, the one showing you with Rebecca Winters when she tried to end things. Meredith has that too. The doors closed on Vanessa's final revelation, leaving Leighton standing alone, the storm outside now matching the chaos within. His phone rang, Preston's number. He ignored it, moving instead to his private safe behind an abstract painting. Inside were backup drives, account information, passports, the tools for a strategic retreat he'd always kept prepared. As he gathered them, his phone rang again. This time it was Curtis Hammond, Meredith's attorney. Leighton hesitated, then answered. What do you want, Hammond? Mr. Whitaker. The attorney's voice was professionally neutral. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Whitaker. She's requested a private meeting with you tonight. No attorneys present. Why would I agree to that? Because she's prepared to offer you a way out, one that preserves your personal wealth, if not your position. Leighton considered his options, acutely aware of how rapidly they were diminishing. When and where? The hospital. 1 hour. After hanging up, Leighton stood motionless, weighing his dwindling choices. Then he accessed his private security system and pulled up the surveillance footage from Vanessa's apartment building. 3 hours earlier, she'd arrived home in a taxi. 40 minutes later, a familiar figure had entered using his own key, James Hargrove. Leighton switched cameras to the building's garage, where his security chief Daniel Mercer sat in an unmarked car, monitoring the entrance. He dialed Mercer's number. "Sir?" Mercer answered on the first ring. "Change of plans," Leighton said. "I need you at Harborview, room 512. Find a position where you can observe without being seen. I'm meeting Meredith there in an hour." "You expect trouble, sir?" Leighton watched the footage of Hargrove entering Vanessa's building, a cold clarity settling over him. "I expect I'll need a witness to whatever happens next." He ended the call and opened his safe again, this time reaching for the custom-made voice recorder disguised as a pen, a precaution from a business deal years ago that he'd never needed to use. Tonight, it seemed, all his contingencies would be tested. As he prepared to leave, thunder rumbled across the city like distant artillery, and Leighton found himself wondering when exactly he had lost control. Had it been when Meredith discovered his affair with Vanessa? When Vanessa found the Lake Union documents? Or had it been set in motion years earlier, with his first compromise, his first betrayal? The thought troubled him as he rode the elevator down, troubled him still as he drove through rain-slicked streets toward Harborview. By the time he reached the hospital parking garage, his troubled thoughts had crystallized into something harder, colder. If Meredith wanted to negotiate, he would be ready. And if negotiation failed, well, he hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat. One way or another, he would reclaim what was his. Starting tonight, Harborview Medical Center stood sentinel against the night sky, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Leighton entered through a side entrance, avoiding the main lobby where he might be recognized. The voice recorder pen sat heavy in his jacket pocket as he took the stairs instead of the elevator, another precaution against being seen. Room 512's door was partially open when he arrived. Leighton paused outside, listening. The steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen were the only sounds. He knocked once before entering. Meredith lay propped against pillows, looking frailer than she had that morning. The harsh hospital lighting accentuated the hollow curves of her cheeks, the paper-thin quality of her skin. Despite this, her eyes remained clear and sharp as they fixed on him. "You came alone," she observed. "As requested." Leighton remained standing near the door. "Though I doubt you did the same. What hidden recording devices are monitoring this conversation, Meredith? What witnesses are lurking nearby?" A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Always the strategist. Assuming everyone operates as you do. With good reason, apparently." He moved further into the room but didn't sit. "Hammond said you have a proposition." "I do." She adjusted her position slightly, suppressing a wince. "But first, I'd like to know if you've spoken with the board members yet." "Some," he lied smoothly. In truth, his calls had gone unanswered, a troubling development that confirmed her words about the board meeting. "Then you know your position is untenable." Her voice held no satisfaction, merely certainty. "The evidence Preston has compiled is conclusive. Evidence that you helped manufacture. No, Leighton. Evidence that you created through your own actions. I merely collected it." He paced to the window, looking out at the rain-blurred lights of the city. 20 years together. And this is how you choose to end it? With betrayal? Is that how you see it? Something in her tone made him turn back to her. After Rebecca, Claire, Sophia, after all the others whose names I never learned, after the manipulation and gaslighting and gradual exclusion from our company, you see my actions as the betrayal. For the first time, Leighton detected genuine emotion breaking through her composed exterior, not anger but a profound sadness that momentarily disarmed him. "You never said anything," he said finally. "All these years, if you were so unhappy, I did say something. Many times. You chose not to hear it." She closed her eyes briefly. "But that's not why we're here now. We're here to discuss terms." Leighton moved closer to her bed, calculating. What terms could possibly satisfy both of us in this situation? You resign as CEO voluntarily, citing health concerns, a plausible explanation given recent events. You surrender your voting shares to a trust that will be managed by an independent board. And, in return, You keep your personal assets, the properties in your name, the accounts not tied to illicit activities. No criminal charges will be pursued. Your reputation remains intact, publicly at least. Leighton gave a harsh laugh. You want me to surrender everything I've built and consider myself lucky? I want you to walk away with dignity and wealth rather than facing disgrace and potential imprisonment. Her voice softened. It's more than you offered those women, more than you're offering the families at Lake Union. A flicker of something, not quite guilt but close, passed through him. He pushed it aside. And Vanessa, what's her role in this generous offer? She proceeds with the civil suit against you personally, not the company. The settlement will fund medical monitoring for the Lake Union residents and contribute to the environmental remediation. And the baby? Meredith held his gaze. The paternity test will determine your legal obligations. Leighton sat in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward. You've orchestrated a masterful takedown, Meredith. I almost admire it. It wasn't about taking you down, Leighton. It was about setting things right. She reached for the water glass on her bedside table. He handed it to her, a reflexive courtesy from their shared past. When did it start? He asked as she sipped. This plan of yours. She returned the glass to the table. Which part? I've known about your affairs for years. The financial improprieties became clear about 3 years ago, when you began excluding me from board meetings. But Lake Union, that was the catalyst, wasn't it? Yes. Her voice grew stronger. When I saw those falsified reports, when I realized you were knowingly putting families at risk of the same cancer that's killing me now, she trailed off, emotion making her voice unsteady. Leighton felt an unexpected pang. In all their years together, he'd rarely seen Meredith truly vulnerable. Even now, facing death, she maintained a dignity that made his own actions seem increasingly shabby by comparison. I never intended for anyone to get sick, he said, surprising himself with the admission. But they did. They are. She regarded him with something like pity. What happened to you, Leighton? When did profit begin to matter more than people? The question hung between them, uncomfortable in its directness. Leighton stood abruptly and moved to the window again. You knew who I was when you married me, he said finally. Ambitious, driven. Ambitious, yes, driven, certainly. Her reflection in the glass watched him, but not cruel, not callous. That came later. People change. They do. The question is why. He turned to face her. Does it matter now? We're past the point of marriage counseling, Meredith. A sad smile touched her lips. I suppose we are. For a moment, the years between them seemed to collapse. All the shared dreams, the early struggles, the triumphs and disappointments of building a life together. Before the affairs, before the cancer, before the betrayals, large and small, that had brought them to this sterile room and this final negotiation. Do you remember our first apartment? She asked suddenly. That terrible walk-up in Queen Anne? With the leaking roof and the radiator that sounded like a dying elephant. Despite himself, Leighton smiled at the memory. You insisted we could make it beautiful, and we did. Salvaged furniture, second-hand books, that horrible green couch your mother gave us. You hated that couch. I loved what it represented. Family, support, beginnings. Her gaze was distant now, seeing into their shared past. We were happy then, weren't we? Before all of this. Leighton felt something shift inside him, a tectonic movement of emotion he'd long suppressed. We were. What changed, Leighton? Was it the money, the power, or was I just not enough anymore? The directness of her question caught him off guard. In their 20 years together, they'd never had this conversation. Not really. There had been arguments about late nights at the office, cold silences after discovered text messages, tearful confrontations that ended in hollow apologies, but never this simple, devastating question. It wasn't you, he said finally, the words emerging with surprising sincerity. I think I started believing my own mythology. The brilliant developer, the business visionary, the man who could have anything, anyone he wanted. And the more you had, the more you needed. Something like that. He sat again, suddenly weary. Does knowing why make any difference now? Perhaps not. She adjusted her position with a grimace of pain. But I wanted to understand. Before the end, the mention of her impending death hung heavy between them. Leighton found himself studying her face, the fine lines around her eyes, the determined set of her mouth, trying to reconcile this dying woman with the vibrant graduate student he'd fallen in love with 2 decades ago. "The offer," he said, returning to safer ground. "How would it work mechanically?" "Curtis has prepared the paperwork. You announce your resignation tomorrow, effective immediately. The board appoints an interim CEO. Preston has suggested Nathan Baxter from the Finance Committee. Baxter is a bureaucrat, not a leader. He's respected and untainted by the Lake Union situation. He'll stabilize things while a proper search is conducted." Leighton nodded slowly, as if considering. "And the transfer of my shares into a voting trust with 3 trustees, Nathan, Preston, and an independent third party, possibly Judge Michaels after her retirement next month. Michaels has always disliked me. She's fair and respected." Meredith's breathing had become more labored, but she pressed on. "The trust would have a mandate to maintain the company's legitimate projects while addressing the environmental and ethical issues." Leighton leaned back, his expression carefully neutral. "And this all happens immediately? Before any paternity test results? Before any litigation proceeds?" "Yes. That's the offer. Certainty. For all parties. I'll need time to consider it. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow before the board meeting." She closed her eyes briefly, fatigue evident. "The alternative is that Preston presents the full evidence package to the board, and events take their course." Leighton stood, his mind already racing ahead to his next move. "I'll contact Hammond with my decision." Meredith opened her eyes, studying him with an intensity that suggested she was trying to memorize his features. "Whatever you're planning, Leighton, whatever countermove you think will save you, remember that I know how you think. I've had years to study your patterns. Then you know I never surrender what's mine." "That's always been your mistake," she said softly. "Thinking that people, companies, even the land itself are possessions to be controlled, rather than relationships to be nurtured." The observation struck closer to home than he cared to admit. Leighton moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I am sorry about the cancer. No one deserves that." "No," she agreed. "They don't. Remember that when you think about Lake Union." He left without another word, the recorder pen still in his pocket, unused. Somehow, recording their conversation had seemed small, petty in the face of her dignity. He texted Mercer to meet him at the car, mind already formulating his counter-strategy. By 2 a.m., Leighton was in his home office, surrounded by documents, multiple screens displaying financial records, property holdings, and legal structures. He'd spent the past 3 hours on secure calls with contacts in the Caymans, Singapore, and Zurich, executing a series of complex transactions. Preston had been clever, but not clever enough. While the attorney had identified and frozen several of Leighton's offshore accounts, he'd missed the most important one, a complex structure in Dubai that Leighton had established through 6 layers of shell companies. That account, with its nearly $40 million, remained untouched. More importantly, Preston didn't know about the leverage Leighton still held over 2 key board members. Walter Chen's gambling debts and Michael Foster's questionable real estate transactions in Vancouver provided Leighton with insurance policies he'd hoped never to use. Tonight, he had activated both. His phone rang, Chen returning his call. "It's the middle of the night, Leighton." The board member's voice was tense. "What's so urgent?" "The board meeting tomorrow. I need your support. I've seen the evidence Preston compiled. The Lake Union situation alone is a regulatory issue that can be managed." Leighton's voice hardened. "Just like your situation at the Bellagio last year could be managed, with the right support." A lengthy silence followed. "You're blackmailing me." "I'm reminding you of our long-standing mutual support." Leighton kept his tone even. "I covered your losses then. I expect your loyalty now. This is different. There are families getting sick, which we'll address with a comprehensive remediation plan, one that I'll present tomorrow, if I have the board's confidence to implement it." More silence. Then, "What exactly do you need from me?" Leighton smiled into the darkness. "Preston will move for my immediate removal. I need you to propose an alternative. A special committee to investigate the allegations, chaired by me, with a 90-day timeline for recommendations. Foster will second it." "Foster's on board with this?" "He will be by morning." Chen sighed heavily. "If I do this, we're even? My marker is cleared?" "Completely. You'll never hear about it again." After ending the call, Leighton sent a text to Foster with a single image, surveillance footage of the board member entering a specific hotel in Vancouver with a woman who was not his wife, followed by, "Call me, now." While waiting for Foster's inevitable call, Leighton turned to his computer and accessed his private server. Meredith had been right about many things, but wrong about one critical detail. The backup servers in Arizona weren't his only information repository. He maintained another, more secure backup in a private facility in Wyoming, accessible only through biometric verification. From this server he downloaded 3 critical files: the true ownership structure of the Lake Union property, which shielded the parent company from liability; documentation showing that Meredith had signed off on preliminary environmental assessments 3 years earlier; and most valuable emails between Vanessa and James Hargrove discussing their strategy, including a damning line about leveraging the pregnancy for maximum pressure. By dawn, Leighton had assembled what he needed: board support to block his immediate removal, financial resources Preston couldn't freeze, and counter-leverage against both Vanessa and Meredith. He felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same rush he experienced when closing a difficult deal or outmaneuvering a competitor. As he showered and dressed for the board meeting, selecting his most impeccably tailored suit and power tie, Leighton reviewed his strategy once more. He would appear contrite but confident at the meeting. He would acknowledge communication failures regarding Lake Union while proposing a comprehensive remediation plan. He would suggest that Vanessa's harassment claims were retaliation for performance issues, backed by the emails showing her collaboration with a competitor. Most importantly, he would use the documents showing Meredith's prior knowledge of the environmental issues to undermine her moral authority. If she had been so concerned about Lake Union, why had she signed the preliminary approval? Why wait years to raise concerns? The suggestion of opportunism, using her terminal diagnosis for leverage, would be implicit but clear. By 8:30 a.m., Leighton was in his car heading toward the Whitaker Tower. He felt rested, prepared, and for the first time since Preston's revelations, back in control. His phone rang through the car's speakers. Curtis Hammond. "Hammond?" he answered. "I was going to call you after the board meeting. I've decided to decline Meredith's generous offer." "That's no longer relevant, Mr. Whitaker." The attorney's voice was formal. "I'm calling to inform you that Mrs. Whitaker passed away at 5:17 this morning." The car swerved slightly as Leighton processed the news. "What? That's not possible. I saw her last night. She was weak but stable." There was a sudden decline around 4 a.m. Organ failure, the doctors said. Not uncommon in late-stage cancer patients. Leighton pulled over, his mind racing. "The timing is remarkably convenient, Hammond." "I don't follow." Hours before a critical board meeting, Meredith suddenly dies, taking with her any ability to refute the claims I was prepared to make about her prior knowledge of Lake Union. "Mr. Whitaker?" Hammond's voice cooled several degrees. "Are you suggesting something improper about your wife's death? Because I should warn you, the hospital room was monitored, and there were 2 nurses with her when she passed." Leighton pinched the bridge of his nose, recalculating. "Of course not, it's just unexpected. For Mrs. Whitaker as well, I imagine." Hammond's tone was dry. "However, her death does trigger certain legal mechanisms, as you're no doubt aware. Her will enters probate immediately, and her 30% ownership of Whitaker properties transfers according to her estate plan." "To whom?" Leighton demanded, though he already suspected the answer. "To the Meredith Whitaker Foundation for Environmental Justice, with voting rights exercised by a 3-person board on which I serve as chairman." The implications hit Leighton like a physical blow. His carefully arranged board support would be meaningless against Meredith's 30% voting bloc, now controlled by Hammond. "There's more," Hammond continued. "Mrs. Whitaker recorded a video statement 3 weeks ago. It was released to all board members and key executives via email at 6 a.m. this morning." "What video? What does it say?" "I suggest you watch it yourself. It should be in your inbox." Hammond's voice softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Mr. Whitaker, she hoped it wouldn't come to this. The offer she made last night was genuine." After ending the call, Leighton sat motionless in his parked car, staring at his phone. With shaking fingers, he opened his email and found the message from Meredith, sent automatically after her death, a digital ghost delivering one final communication. The subject line read simply, "The truth about Lake Union." Leighton pressed play, and Meredith's face filled his screen, gaunt but composed, her eyes clear and direct. She sat in what appeared to be a comfortable room, not a hospital. "Hello, Leighton," she began. "If you're seeing this, it means I'm gone, and you've chosen the harder path. I want you to know that I don't hate you for what you've done. To me, to our company, to those families. But I couldn't let it continue." As the video played, detailing with devastating precision his systematic corruption of their shared enterprise, Leighton felt his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Meredith knew everything, not just about Lake Union, but about the Vancouver project, the bribery in Chicago, the falsified permits in Portland. She had dates, figures, names of officials. She had copies of documents he thought were destroyed. And most damning of all, she had his own words, recorded during unguarded moments, when he thought she wasn't listening or wasn't present. Conversations with Preston, with contractors, with officials he'd bribed. By the time the video ended with Meredith's quiet but firm statement about her foundation's plans to rebuild the company ethically, Leighton understood the full extent of his defeat. He had been outplayed by the woman he'd underestimated for years, the woman whose intelligence and principles he had once admired before ambition corrupted him. His phone buzzed with a text from Preston. Board meeting moved to 10 a.m. Agenda changed to memorial recognition for Meredith and transition planning. In that moment, staring at his phone as rain began to fall again on his windshield, Leighton believed he had reached the nadir of his carefully constructed life. He was wrong. The true depths were still to come. The Whitaker Tower stood 40 stories high, its glass facade reflecting clouds that had momentarily parted to allow weak sunlight through. As Leighton entered the lobby, he noticed something different. The security guard who normally greeted him with deference merely nodded curtly. The receptionist who always stood when he approached remained seated, her expression carefully neutral. By the time he reached the executive floor, Leighton had composed himself. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cuffs, and adopted the confident stride that had carried him through countless crises before. The boardroom doors stood open. Inside, 14 people sat around the massive table of reclaimed redwood, a table Meredith had insisted on for its sustainable sourcing. Conversation ceased when he entered. 14 pairs of eyes tracked him as he moved to his customary place at the head of the table. His chair was occupied. "Mr. Whitaker," said Nathan Baxter, the finance committee chair now sitting in Leighton's seat. "We weren't certain you'd join us." Leighton remained standing, quickly assessing the room. Preston sat to Baxter's right, his thin face impassive. Curtis Hammond was present, which was unexpected. Walter Chen avoided eye contact entirely, while Michael Foster studied his hands with apparent fascination. The remaining board members displayed expressions ranging from discomfort to open hostility. Most surprising was Vanessa, seated near the far end, a portfolio open before her. Her blue eyes met his with cool assessment. "Given my wife's passing, I thought my presence essential," Leighton said, his voice steady. "Though I'm curious why our marketing director is attending a board meeting." "Ms. Adler is here at my invitation," Hammond replied, "as executor of Meredith's estate." "I see." Leighton remained standing, unwilling to surrender the psychological advantage of height. "Then I assume we're here to discuss transition plans following Meredith's unfortunate passing. Among other things," Baxter said. "Please have a seat, Leighton." With deliberate casualness, Leighton took the nearest empty chair. "Before we begin, I'd like to say that despite our recent differences, Meredith's death is a profound loss. She was a remarkable woman." Several board members nodded uncomfortably. Preston cleared his throat. "Yes, she was," he agreed. "Which is why we've already viewed her video statement." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Leighton maintained his composed expression through sheer force of will. "A statement made while heavily medicated," he said smoothly. "While I appreciate my wife's concerns, many of her claims reflect misunderstandings about complex business operations." "Misunderstandings?" Hammond's voice cut through the room. "Mr. Whitaker, the documentation supporting Mrs. Whitaker's claims fills 17 bankers' boxes. It includes audio recordings, internal memos, financial records, and sworn statements from multiple employees and contractors. Documents and statements that haven't been properly authenticated or contextualized," Leighton countered, "as I was prepared to explain to Meredith before her untimely passing." "Her murder, you mean?" Vanessa's voice was sharp as a blade. A stunned silence fell over the room. Leighton stared at her, genuinely shocked. "What did you say?" Vanessa closed her portfolio and stood. Meredith Whittaker didn't die of natural causes last night. She was murdered. Poisoned. That's absurd, Leighton said, but his voice lacked conviction as cold realization began to seep through him. The doctors said organ failure, a common complication of late-stage cancer. A convenient explanation, Hammond agreed, until the tox screen results came back an hour ago. Meredith's tea was laced with digitalis, foxglove extract, virtually undetectable in a cancer patient's bloodstream unless specifically tested for, which it was, at Meredith's prior request. She suspected someone might try to silence her, Preston added quietly. Leighton felt the room tilting around him. You can't possibly think You visited her last night, Hammond continued. Alone, against hospital protocol. At her request. And the security footage shows you were the last visitor before her sudden decline. Leighton looked around the table, suddenly understanding his position. This is ridiculous. I didn't poison my wife. Perhaps not personally, Vanessa said. But Daniel Mercer was in the hospital last night too, on your orders. The mention of his security chief's name struck Leighton like a physical blow. Mercer was there as a witness, nothing more. A witness who somehow gained access to the nurses' station during a shift change, Hammond said. Who was seen near the room where Meredith's meals were prepared? A man with military training that would include knowledge of undetectable poisons. Where is Mercer now? Leighton demanded. Being questioned by police, Preston replied. Along with your private banker in Geneva, 3 EPA officials and Commissioner Harkins. The systematic dismantling of Leighton's power structure was happening with breathtaking speed. He struggled to keep up, to find an angle, a leverage point. This is a coordinated attack on my reputation, he said, forcing conviction into his voice. And I can prove it. He turned to Vanessa. Ms. Adler has been working with my wife to orchestrate this takeover while simultaneously conspiring with her ex-husband, a senior attorney at our competitor Archer Development. Vanessa smiled slightly. You mean my brother, James Hargrove? Your brother? Leighton faltered. Half-brother, technically. Same mother, different fathers, different last names. Her composure was absolute. He was never my husband, Leighton. That was a story we created to explain our meetings. But your pregnancy is real. Her hand moved to her belly. The father is real too. Just not you. The revelation hit him with stunning force. The paternity test was completed yesterday. She placed a document on the table. You're not the father, Leighton. You never were. The timing of the pregnancy was a convenient coincidence that Meredith suggested we use. Leighton stared at her, recalibrating everything he thought he knew. Then who? Does it matter? Vanessa's voice was ice. What matters is that while you were creating shell companies to hide your corruption, Meredith was creating a network to expose it. While you were falsifying environmental reports, she was gathering evidence. And while you were making plans to silence her, she was ensuring that her death would be your downfall, not her submission. Hammond opened a leather portfolio. The police have been provided with evidence suggesting your involvement in Meredith's death. Whether it proves sufficient for charges remains to be seen. What's not in question is the evidence of financial crimes, environmental violations, bribery, and sexual harassment. The SEC has already frozen the company's primary accounts, Preston added, and your personal accounts as well. You can't do that, Leighton said, but his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. We already have. Baxter slid a document across the table. This is a unanimous board resolution, excluding only your vote, removing you as CEO and chairman, effective immediately. Unanimous? Leighton's eyes found Chen and Foster. Both men finally met his gaze, and in their eyes he saw something unexpected. Relief. They came to us weeks ago, Hammond explained, following Leighton's gaze. Confessed everything, in exchange for immunity and the clearing of their obligations to you. They provided additional evidence of your methods. The last pillars of Leighton's strategy collapsed. He stared at the document before him, the formal legal language that excised him from the company he had built. Behind the shock, a deeper realization was forming. This had been Meredith's plan all along, not just to expose him or remove him, but to isolate him completely, to strip away every ally, every resource, every escape route. There's more, Preston said almost gently. The Lake Union families have filed a class action suit. The preliminary evidence suggests you knowingly proceeded with development despite clear health risks. That's criminal negligence, possibly reckless endangerment. I wasn't the only one who approved that project, Leighton said, desperation edging into his voice. Meredith signed off on the preliminary assessments. I have the documents. Forgeries, Hammond cut in. Created using a digital signature captured from legitimate documents. We have the metadata, proving when they were created, well after the original reports were altered. Leighton fell silent, the full scope of his defeat becoming clear. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn, not just by Meredith but by a network she had patiently built, while he believed her to be focused on her academic career, then later distracted by her illness. What happens now? He finally asked. You're being escorted from the building, Baxter said. Your access credentials have been revoked. Your office is being searched as we speak. And my residence, my personal property. Your apartment is owned by the company, Preston reminded him. Your access there is being restricted pending the completion of the investigation. You'll be permitted to retrieve personal items under supervision. I'm being treated like a criminal, Leighton said, anger finally breaking through his shock. Because you are one, Vanessa replied simply. Leighton turned to her, seeing her clearly for the first time, not as his conquest or his betrayer, but as Meredith's agent. You never cared for me at all, did you? Something like pity crossed her face. I tried to. In the beginning, I wanted to believe you were better than the rumors, that the women who had come before me were exaggerating. She shook her head. But then I saw the real you. The man who could laugh about families getting sick from contaminated groundwater, who could manipulate environmental reports to save money, who could threaten a woman's career if she rejected his advances. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Leighton wanted to deny them, but found he couldn't. Not convincingly. Not anymore. You planned this from the start, he said instead. No, she corrected him. Meredith planned it. I just helped execute her vision. Why? What did she offer you? Justice. For the women you victimized, for the families you endangered. Vanessa placed her hand on her belly again. And the chance to make sure my child grows up in a world where men like you are held accountable. Hammond cleared his throat. Security is waiting outside, Mr. Whitaker. They'll escort you out. Leighton stood, adjusting his suit jacket with as much dignity as he could muster. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Preston said, not unkindly. But there's one more thing you should know. What's that? The video Meredith recorded, the one detailing your activities. She made two versions. The one sent to the board contains only business improprieties. The one sent to the authorities includes everything else. The Lakeshore condo, Leighton said, understanding immediately. Rebecca Winters. Preston nodded grimly, among others. As two security guards appeared in the doorway, Leighton surveyed the boardroom one last time, the table where he had made billion-dollar decisions, the views of the city he had helped shape, the people who had once deferred to his every word, all lost now. Meredith always did have a flair for the theatrical, he said, forcing a final show of nonchalance. Orchestrating all this from beyond the grave. Not all of it, Hammond replied. There's still her memorial service tomorrow. I assume I'm not welcome. On the contrary, Hammond's expression was unreadable. Your presence is specifically requested by Meredith herself. The police were waiting in the lobby. Two detectives, a man and a woman, both with the impersonal efficiency of people who had seen it all before. They did not handcuff him, a small mercy that Leighton suspected was Meredith's doing, rather than standard procedure. Leighton Whitaker, the male detective began, we'd like to ask you some questions regarding the death of Meredith Whitaker. My attorney will meet us at the station, Leighton replied automatically, though he wasn't entirely sure which attorney would still represent him. As they escorted him through the lobby of his own building, employees stopped to watch. Faces he had passed countless times without truly seeing now stared with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and in some cases, undisguised satisfaction. Word had spread quickly. Outside, rain had returned, a steady, soaking downpour that felt appropriate to the moment. As the detectives led him toward their unmarked car, Leighton caught sight of a television crew setting up across the street under umbrellas. A reporter was doing a stand-up, gesturing toward the Whitaker Tower behind her. On the screen of the camera, he could make out the scrolling headline, Real estate mogul questioned in wife's suspicious death. The detectives noticed his hesitation. "We can use the service entrance if you prefer," the female detective offered, a small kindness that somehow made the situation worse. "No," Leighton replied, straightening his shoulders. "This way is fine." As they approached the police car, Leighton thought of Meredith, not as she had been in her final days, but as she was when they first met, brilliant, principled, her green eyes alight with passion for literature and justice. The woman who had seen something in him worth loving, worth building a life with. The woman he had betrayed not just with other bodies, but with the slow corruption of everything they had once valued together. For the first time in years, perhaps the first time ever, Leighton felt something like genuine remorse, not for being caught, but for what he had become, for what he had lost long before Meredith's plan had taken it from him. The car door closed behind him with a sound of finality. Through the rain-streaked window, he watched the Whitaker Tower recede, a monument no longer to his success, but to his downfall. In the reflection of the glass, he saw not the confident, powerful man he had cultivated for decades, but a stranger with haunted eyes and a face etched with the consequences of his own choices. The detectives drove in silence, giving him this moment of private reckoning. Leighton knew they were taking him to a place where hard questions awaited, where the careful fabrications of his life would be dismantled piece by piece. But the hardest question had already been asked, by Meredith in their final conversation. "What happened to you, Leighton?" He still had no answer, and now it seemed he would have a lifetime to contemplate it. As the car turned a corner, his phone chimed with a final text message, from a number he didn't recognize. "Memorial service, First Presbyterian, 10 a.m. tomorrow. The video you don't want to miss. MM for Meredith." A message scheduled before her death, or perhaps from Hammond using her initial. Either way, the implication was clear. There was one final revelation to come, one last act in Meredith's carefully orchestrated dismantling of his life. Leighton closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond words. The empire he had built, the power he had wielded, the control he had maintained through manipulation and fear, all of it gone in less than 24 hours. And tomorrow would bring Meredith's final act of revenge. Seattle mornings in autumn often carried a particular quality of light, a soft, diffused glow that seemed to render the world in watercolor. On the day of Meredith Whitaker's memorial service, this gentle illumination filtered through the stained glass windows of First Presbyterian Church, casting jewel-toned patterns across the assembled mourners. Leighton sat alone in the last pew, as far from the altar as possible. His attorney, not Preston but Alan Forrester, a criminal defense specialist he'd once helped avoid a DUI charge, had advised against attending at all. The police investigation into Meredith's death remained open, though Leighton had been released after questioning the previous day, lacking sufficient evidence to hold him. "It's a publicity trap," Forrester had warned. "Whatever video Hammond mentioned, it's designed to damage you further." But Leighton had come anyway, driven by something beyond curiosity or strategic calculation, something closer to compulsion. He needed to see Meredith's final move, to understand the full scope of her design. The church filled steadily around him. Faculty members from Meredith's university, former students, friends he hadn't seen in years. Business associates entered cautiously, perhaps uncertain which side of the rapidly forming divide to place themselves on. Reporters gathered outside, barred from entering but eager to capture the arrival and departure of attendees at what had become not just a memorial, but a media event. Leighton observed it all with detached precision, his emotional responses muted as if experiencing the world through thick glass. He had barely slept since being released, spending the night in an anonymous airport hotel, the only establishment that would accept cash without asking questions. His bank accounts remained frozen, his credit cards deactivated, his passport flagged. He had exactly $4,520 in cash, withdrawn the morning before his world collapsed. A murmur rippled through the congregation as Curtis Hammond entered, accompanied by Vanessa. She wore a simple black maternity dress, her pregnancy now impossible to disguise. The sight of her triggered a complex reaction in Leighton, anger mingled with grudging respect. She had played her role flawlessly, maintaining the deception until the precise moment of maximum impact. The service began with music, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, performed by a former student of Meredith's, who had gone on to join the Seattle Symphony. Leighton remembered Meredith playing this recording on Sunday mornings in their first apartment, the notes filling their modest space while she graded papers and he reviewed building plans. After the music came the eulogies. A department colleague spoke of Meredith's brilliance as a scholar, her dedication to students, her groundbreaking work on ethical frameworks in contemporary literature. A childhood friend shared stories of her determination and integrity, even as a young girl. Hammond spoke last, his words carefully chosen. Meredith Whittaker lived with purpose, he said, his voice filling the vaulted space. Even in her final months, facing a diagnosis that would have caused many to turn inward, she remained focused on creating positive change, on ensuring that her life's work, both academic and personal, left the world better than she found it. Leighton detected the subtle emphasis, understood the coded message directed at him. He remained impassive, even as he felt the occasional glance from mourners curious or bold enough to look his way. After Hammond concluded, the minister approached the pulpit. Meredith prepared extensively for this day, he explained. She selected every reading, every piece of music, and she asked that we include a video message, her final communication to those gathered here today. A screen descended from above the altar. The lights dimmed. Leighton tensed, preparing himself for whatever public humiliation Meredith had orchestrated. The screen illuminated with Meredith's image, not the gaunt, illness-ravaged woman of her final weeks, but a healthier version, filmed perhaps 3 or 4 months earlier. She sat in what appeared to be her university office, bookshelves visible behind her. "Hello, friends," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for coming today. I've never been comfortable with the convention of speaking about the deceased in idealized terms, so I hope you'll forgive me for speaking directly to you, rather than leaving that task to others." She adjusted her position slightly, a familiar gesture that sent an unexpected pang through Leighton's chest. "I've spent my career studying narratives, how they shape our understanding of the world and ourselves. The stories we tell about our lives often reveal more about our values than any statement of principle could. In my final months, I've thought a great deal about the narrative of my own life, and what I hope it might convey." Meredith paused, her green eyes seeming to look directly at the camera, at the assembled mourners, at Leighton. "I don't want my story to be one of victimhood, of betrayal, or even of justice served. Those narratives have their place, but they center on reaction rather than action, on response rather than initiative. Instead, I hope my life might be understood as a story of stewardship, of caring for the things entrusted to us, whether relationships, resources, or responsibilities." The congregation sat in rapt attention. Leighton found himself leaning forward slightly, caught off guard by the direction of her message. Whittaker Properties began with a vision of responsible development, buildings that would serve communities, respect the environment, and stand as examples of ethical business practices. Somewhere along the way, that vision became corrupted. Profit superseded purpose. Expansion eclipsed responsibility. Here it comes, Leighton thought, the public denunciation he had been bracing for. This corruption wasn't the fault of one person alone, Meredith continued, surprising him. It happened gradually, through small compromises that became larger ones, through silence that became complicity, through ambition that became greed. I bear my share of responsibility for allowing this to happen, for looking away when I should have looked more closely, for choosing comfort over confrontation. Murmurs rippled through the church. This was not the narrative the newspapers had been constructing over the past 24 hours, with their stark headlines casting Leighton as villain and Meredith as avenging angel. In these final months, I've worked to correct the course of the company we built, to return it to its original purpose. Some of these corrections have been painful, public, and contentious. Some have involved decisions I never imagined having to make. All have been undertaken with one goal: to ensure that the Whittaker name stands for integrity again. She paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. Today, I want to announce the establishment of the Meredith Whittaker Foundation for Environmental Justice. This foundation will oversee the transformation of Whittaker Properties into an organization dedicated to sustainable development, community enhancement, and ethical business practices. It will also manage a significant remediation and compensation fund for the families affected by the Lake Union development. Leighton felt a strange mix of emotions as Meredith outlined the restructuring of what had been their shared enterprise. There was the expected anger at seeing his life's work repurposed, but also an unexpected relief, as if a burden he hadn't acknowledged was being lifted. I've asked Curtis Hammond and the board to consider retention of as many current employees as possible during this transition, Meredith continued. The mistakes of leadership should not result in hardship for those who were simply doing their jobs. Her expression softened slightly. And now I'd like to address my husband, Leighton. I believe he's here today, though we haven't spoken directly about his attendance. The congregation seemed to hold its collective breath. Dozens of heads turned subtly, looking for him. Leighton felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never experienced in public before. Leighton, Meredith said, her gaze seemingly finding him despite the impossibility. Our marriage began with love, respect, and shared values. I don't know precisely when or how we lost our way, but I know that the man I married, the man who once spoke passionately about creating spaces that would enhance people's lives, who spent hours refining designs to preserve century-old trees, who insisted on fair wages for construction workers, that man is still within you somewhere. Leighton felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the protective shell he'd constructed. I've made decisions that will significantly impact your life, your career, your legacy. These decisions were necessary to protect others, to correct injustices, to prevent further harm, but they were not made from hatred or vengeance, though I know they may feel that way to you now. She leaned closer to the camera, her expression earnest. What happens next is your choice. You can fight these changes, expend your remaining resources on legal battles and public relations campaigns, or you can accept them as an opportunity for transformation, painful but ultimately liberating. The charges you face are serious, the consequences significant, but they need not define the rest of your life. Leighton was vaguely aware of tears on his face, of the utter silence in the church as Meredith continued. I'm leaving something for you. Not in my will. That's been carefully structured to ensure the Foundation's work continues unimpeded. This is something separate. Hammond will provide you with an envelope after the service. It contains coordinates and a key. What you do with them is, again, your choice. She sat back slightly, her expression now peaceful. To everyone else here today, thank you for being part of my life. Please remember me not as a saint or a martyr, but as a flawed human being who tried, especially at the end, to align her actions with her values. And please consider your own narratives, the stories you're creating through your choices, your silences, your compromises. It's never too late to revisit the plot, to introduce new themes, to become a more conscious author of your own life. The screen faded to black. For several moments the church remained silent. Then softly at first but swelling, the cellist began to play again. This time, Elgar's Nimrod from the Enigma Variations. The music filled the space, giving voice to emotions too complex for words. Leighton sat motionless as the service concluded, as people filed past with sideways glances, as reporters outside shouted questions he couldn't hear through the thick wooden doors. He remained seated long after most had departed, staring at the place where Meredith's image had been. Hammond approached eventually, a cream-colored envelope in his hand. She asked me to give you privacy to view this, the attorney said, placing the envelope on the pew beside Leighton. Then, surprising both of them, he added, for what it's worth, she meant what she said, about transformation being possible. After Hammond departed, Leighton opened the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing GPS coordinates, a key attached with a small piece of tape, and a handwritten note. This place was important once. Perhaps it still can be. 2 days later, Leighton stood at the edge of a familiar property in the Cascade foothills, about an hour east of Seattle. The small cabin overlooked a pristine lake, surrounded by Douglas firs and western red cedars. He and Meredith had purchased it during their 3rd year of marriage, before Whitaker Properties became successful, when they still spent weekends hiking and evenings reading by the wood stove. They had stopped coming here gradually, first less frequently, then not at all. Leighton had suggested selling it during a cash flow crunch early in the company's expansion, but Meredith had adamantly refused. Eventually, he had forgotten about it entirely, assuming it had been sold at some point without his direct involvement. The key worked. Inside the cabin was exactly as he remembered, as if preserved in amber, the mismatched furniture they had collected from thrift stores, the bookshelves Leighton had built himself. Meredith's collection of first-edition poetry volumes. On the kitchen table sat another envelope with his name written in Meredith's distinctive handwriting. This one contained legal documents, the deed to the cabin and surrounding 5 acres, transferred solely to his name 1 month before her death, along with bank account information for a modest fund she had established for its maintenance. A small note explained that this property had been kept separate from all other assets, outside the purview of investigations or litigation. A place to think, a place to remember, a place to decide what comes next. Leighton moved through the cabin like a man in a dream, touching objects that connected him to a past self he had long abandoned, a self that had valued creation over acquisition, quality over quantity, integrity over advantage. On the deck overlooking the lake, he found a chair positioned to catch the evening light. He sat, watching the sun descend behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water. For the first time since his world had collapsed, Leighton felt something besides anger or fear or calculation, something like peace, however temporary. His phone had no signal here, another gift from Meredith, he realized. Isolation from the storm still raging in Seattle, from the headlines and investigations and accusations. Time and space to consider her final message. As darkness fell, Leighton lit the wood stove and sat before it, watching flames consume cedar logs. The crackle and hiss transported him back 20 years, to winter evenings when he and Meredith had talked for hours about books, ideas, dreams, before acquisitions and affairs, before compromise became corruption. He spent 3 days at the cabin, mostly in silence, walking familiar trails, swimming in the cold, clear lake, reading books from shelves that contained the literary touchstones of their early relationship. On the 4th morning, he found himself standing before the small desk in the bedroom where Meredith used to write. The top drawer contained a leather-bound journal he had never seen before. The first entry was dated shortly after her diagnosis, the last just 3 days before her death. Between them lay an intimate chronicle of Meredith's final months, her initial shock and grief, her anger at Leighton's betrayals, her gradual formulation of the plan that would ultimately destroy him. But it was more than a revenge journal. It contained profound reflections on mortality, purpose, forgiveness, on the nature of justice versus vengeance, on what it meant to leave a meaningful legacy. The final entry read simply, "I have done what was necessary to protect the vulnerable, to correct injustices, to prevent further harm. But justice without the possibility of redemption is merely punishment. L will lose everything he values now: power, control, status. My hope is that in this loss, he might rediscover what he once valued more: purpose, integrity, creation." The cabin remains untouched, outside the legal proceedings, a seed of possibility. Whether it grows or withers depends on choices only he can make. I have loved him, hated him, forgiven him, and now I must leave him, to justice, to consequence, and to possibility. Whatever narrative he creates from here is his own. Leighton closed the journal, overwhelmed. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming softly on the cedar shake roof. He moved to the window, watching drops create expanding circles on the lake's surface. For the first time, he saw Meredith's actions not as revenge, but as a complex act of justice tempered with mercy. She had systematically dismantled the corrupt empire he had built, but left him this small sanctuary, had ensured he would face consequences for his actions, but created space for reflection and potential renewal. The revelation didn't erase the anger or resentment entirely. Those emotions still surged periodically, along with fear about the legal proceedings that awaited him in Seattle. But alongside them now emerged something new, a grudging respect for the woman who had outmaneuvered him. Yes, but also a tentative openness to the possibility she had offered. 3 weeks later, Leighton sat in Alan Forrester's office in downtown Seattle, listening as the attorney outlined the plea agreement the prosecutor was offering. "It's actually better than I expected," Forrester admitted. 5 years, potentially reduced to 3 with good behavior. Significant financial penalties, of course, but no additional charges related to Meredith's death. They couldn't find sufficient evidence linking you or Mercer directly to the digitalis. "And the cabin?" Leighton asked. "The account Meredith established?" "Untouched. She structured it meticulously through a separate trust established years ago. It's completely insulated from the civil and criminal proceedings." Leighton nodded, thinking of the small sanctuary waiting in the mountains. 3 years was a long time, but not an eternity. And perhaps the enforced separation from his former life was part of Meredith's design as well, creating space and time for the transformation she had referenced in her final message. "What about the company?" he asked. "The foundation?" Forrester shuffled through some papers. "The reorganization is proceeding. Nathan Baxter was named interim CEO. The Lake Union property has been designated for comprehensive environmental remediation, to be converted eventually into a public green space with a research center focused on environmental health. And Vanessa Adler, appointed director of the remediation project. She's withdrawn the personal harassment suit as part of the overall settlement, though the testimony remains part of the record." Leighton absorbed this information, surprised by his own lack of anger. The company he had built was being fundamentally transformed, yet something about the direction felt right. A course correction back to the original vision he and Meredith had shared, before ambition corrupted it. "I'll take the deal," he said finally. Forrester looked relieved. "That's wise. Fighting would only extend the process and likely result in a harsher sentence." "It's not about the legal calculation," Leighton said, surprising himself with the admission. "It's about accepting consequences." The attorney studied him curiously. "If you don't mind my saying so, you seem different than when we first discussed your case." Leighton considered this. "I've had time to think about choices, patterns, about what Meredith was trying to accomplish. And what was that, in your view? Justice, not vengeance." Leighton stood, moving to the window overlooking the city. From this vantage point, he could see 3 buildings he had developed, their distinctive architectural elements visible even at a distance. "She could have destroyed me completely, had the means and motive to do so. Instead, she created parameters for consequence, boundaries for accountability, and possibilities for what comes after," Forrester offered, following Leighton's gaze to the skyline. "Yes." Leighton turned back to the attorney. "Schedule the plea hearing. I'm ready to move forward." As he left Forrester's office, Leighton was acutely aware of having reached a turning point. The path ahead was difficult. Legal proceedings, imprisonment, eventual rebuilding from vastly diminished circumstances. Yet alongside these challenges existed an unexpected sense of lightness. As if in losing everything, he had also been freed from the weight of maintaining his carefully constructed facade. Outside the building, autumn sunlight broke through Seattle's persistent clouds, illuminating the cityscape with momentary brilliance. Leighton paused, absorbing the view of the city he had helped shape for good and ill. In his pocket was a small key to the cabin, to the possibility Meredith had preserved for him even as she dismantled everything else. Whatever came next would be constructed on a foundation of consequence rather than evasion, of accountability rather than manipulation, a different kind of architecture than the one he had practiced for so long. As he walked toward the courthouse to meet Forrester for the plea hearing, Leighton felt the presence of Meredith's final gift, not the cabin itself, but the opportunity it represented, a chance to reimagine his own narrative, to become, as she had put it, a more conscious author of your own life. For the architect who had lost his empire, it was both an ending and perhaps the blueprint for a beginning. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.